I would like to thank Orange for the invitation to address this wonderful audience. And I would like to discuss an important issue, and that is the issue of leadership and the lack of a paradigm that can deal with a more diverse world through the influences of internet, social media, on the internet, internationalization. We see that our old leadership paradigms, predominantly written by Americans, are getting bankrupt. 95% of the books on leadership are written by Anglo-Saxons, because obviously 5% of the world live there. Now, what is the bankruptcy caused by? It is what we call the bipolar nature in which they address the issues. We are either centralized or we're decentralized. In Myers-Briggs, we are thinking or we are feeling. Even in cultural studies, we're either individualistic or collectivistic. And that's not working anymore in a diverse world. We cannot put all the problems in bipolar scales. What is the alternative? Because, shall we go French? Now, if you read the French book, and that's great for French people, you smell that it's written for French people. We have a book called Les Grands Patrons, where you see that 55% of the book is discussing the background of the leaders. Where are they coming from? Which village were they raised? Did they go to the École Polytechnique? And if you know the French, you say, yeah, sure. If you read a Chinese book about Chinese leadership, you know it's all about the martial arts, very popular in Asia, in particular in China. That is okay when the Chinese stay in China, when the French stay in France, and when the Americans stay in America. Or if you, as a European, let's say, move to China, you will read the Chinese book. And if you as a German will go to France, you read the French book. And if you go to America, you read the American book. But what to do when suddenly your team is multicultural? You have a Chinese in your group, a French person, a Scandinavian, a Nigerian, a Japanese. Which book will you read? The issue is we need a new paradigm. And if we don't change the paradigm, we get again clients that look like this. And that's not where we want to go. The last financial crisis is a wonderful example of how bipolar scales have led us into a choice. It's better to globalize than to remain local. It's better to be individualistic and create creativity than to be a team member. It's not working. Especially if you notice now that you don't even have to move to deal with diversity. And let's take myself. I live in Amsterdam, and 50% of people younger than 20 years of age don't have Dutch parents. They have Turkish descent, Moroccan descent, there are English expatriates. What book will I ask them to read? It's not working anymore. We need a new paradigm of leadership. So what is this new paradigm of leadership that we need to deal more effectively with diversity? And it's amazing because the essence of leadership is creating wealth. And we have often talked about adding value. I have good news for you, you cannot add value because values are not addable. For example, if you take a safe car, it's easy to make. To make a speedy car, easy to make. But if you want to make a safe car speedy or a speedy car safe, that's difficult. The essence of leadership is how to combine values that are not easily joined, therefore scarce, therefore profitable. And we think the new paradigm of leadership is called servant leadership. And a servant leader only has one thing in his or her mind. How can I enable other people to perform better? And the meta dilemma here, the different values that are not easily joined, is to be a servant and a leader at the same time. So don't confuse it with a servant dash leader. Let's take a final example, and that is the example of sustainability. It is amazing how we have jumped on the last fashion in management thinking. Everything should be done now for society. I think it's as nonsensical as what we did 100 years ago with scientific management. Obviously, in those times, it was very natural to talk about we have to increase efficiency. And there were time and motion studies by Frederick Taylor, Henri Fayol, but it killed itself by exaggeration. And the exaggeration was born out of an experiment called the Hawthorne experiment, when they increased light on one side and kept it stable on the other side. This was in the 30s. And what they found out in the group where they increased the intensity of light with the assembly of telephones, productivity went up. In the group where light was taken stable productivity. They say, hey, another great factor that we can introduce to increase productivity, intensity of light. Then a smart engineer said, you know what we do? We decrease the intensity of light. And what happened? Productivity still went up. Now that's interesting. So a whole new school was born, and that was called the Human Relations School. And the Human Relations School focused on employee development and learning. But it killed itself by the same exaggeration as scientific management in the beginning. Because they said this is all internal. We need the external side, namely we need to satisfy the client. And you remember in the 60s, early 70s, marketing and sales became very popular. Client is king, etc. And it killed itself by the next exaggeration. You remember shareholder value? I remember very well that I was once invited by the Financial Times to write an article, a column in the Financial Times called Shareholder Value, the value created for people who never share. And I predicted it would kill itself for the same reason. If you take a value to its extreme at the cost of other values, it will kill itself. Shall I predict the next bankruptcy, the next pathology? Corporate social responsibility. Why? Because if CO2 emissions are your problem, why don't you stop your manufacturing? Why don't you stop driving a car? And people will say, oh, wait a second, but what about our employees? What about our shareholders? And that's the point I want to make, that the sustainability of an organization, which is the ultimate responsibility for a leader, is to reconcile the 10 tensions between the share and the stakeholders. In other words, we have chased the unicorn. We have chased one value at the cost of another value. And that's not sustainable, including just going for society. The essence of leadership is to create sustainability. And sustainability can be only reached when you deal with the dilemmas between the stakeholders. And we have called this the 10 golden dilemmas. Let me give you some examples. If we look at corporate efficiency versus employee development and learning, we find the dilemma, on the one hand we need to develop our people versus to become more cost conscious. And we see many of those. Equal opportunities versus positive discrimination. Short-term cash flow versus long-term sustainability. Satisfy our customers at all costs versus shareholder value. Global versus local. And it's the role of the leader to reconcile those dilemmas. Let me then show what servant leadership does. Servant leadership tries to integrate those opposites. And they do it in a particular way. And let me show you a first example. Global versus local. And this is a dilemma that obviously is created between the need for efficiency, effectiveness, economies of scale, and that is a call for globalization. On the other hand, we want to be flexible, close to the client, close to the customer, and that's a call for local. That creates a dilemma. Where the old paradigm said you have to make a choice. If you don't make a choice, you don't know if you're global or local. What we need to do is crack the line into a dual axis. If we exaggerate global and centralized approaches, we get the famous global organization where the rest of the world is called ROW. The global corporation are corporations where headquarters dictates everything. It's a bit a half lame duck. If we take the other extreme, we find the decentral multinational. It's the multi-local type of organization. The multi-local type of organization is an organization where we deal with local opportunities in a very pragmatic way, but the only thing that binds us is, for example, a brand or a financial link. Very, very attractive is what we call the compromise. The compromise is position 5-5, and that in this case is the wonderful idea of the international corporation. That's an organization that looks like a Statue of Liberty with a local flag. Walt Disney parks are a good example, where you drink wine in Paris and perhaps only Coca-Cola in Florida. What is the reconciliation? The reconciliation is what we call the wonderful transcultural corporation. 3 characteristics. It learns locally and then takes the best practices which are globalized. It has a top which is diverse, and in the very, very core of it, it's a value-driven organization. And the value-driven organization is an organization that has sophisticated values. It doesn't go for teamwork. No, it will say we strive for teams that consist of creative individuals. It says things like we believe in straight feedback with diplomacy. And especially in the Netherlands, that's quite a challenge. Let's take a second tension between stakeholders. In this case, between society and the employee. Society says we need more females at the top, for example. So we have to positively discriminate. Employees say, no, we have to look at achievements and really value them on output. So we get this tension between equal opportunities and positive discrimination. It's a dilemma. And again, we need to crack the line. And when we crack the line, we see on the one hand that minorities, to give them a chance, need to be pampered a bit. We need to have, as Deborah Tannen says, a lot of rapport. They need a safe environment. On the other hand, we need to be tough like a nail, because if we just pamper them, people will say, hey, you only discriminate them positively. But both will not work. Just being tough and just being close is not good enough. The best way, as a lot of research has shown, is to have strong rapport with credible reports. In other words, when we, like parents with children, have an unconditional love, that's close rapport, within which we can be tough like a nail. That's the best in the long run. That is sustainable minority management. And that's what the servant leader does. Let's take a third tension. And this is a tension that we have between, on the one hand, the need for efficiency, and the other hand, employees. And we call this tension specific versus diffuse. On the one hand, for example, do we need to go for financial performance? That is very specific. On the other hand, we need to diffusely develop our people. It's interesting because the dilemmas and the tensions between the stakeholders are very similar across the globe. The way we approach those dilemmas are quite different across cultures. Let us take the work of Kurt Lewin. Kurt Lewin was a German psychologist who went to America. And in some of his works in the early 50s, he described his culture shock in America as a German. He said, it's amazing, you hardly know Americans and they talk about all kinds of things with you. In Germany that would take 2 or 3 years. And he calls them the U-type, which we call the peach, or the G-type, the German type, the coconut. And we see here the characteristic of the peach and the coconut. In the center there is a tough nut with a lot of accessible flesh for the peach, the U-type, the American type. And the coconut is tough on the outside, but very soft on the inside. When I went to America, it was amazing. Without even asking, people offered their help to help me move in a new apartment in Philadelphia. And I looked around and I said, Bill, aren't you tired? Thank you for helping. And before I knew, I looked around, he was in my refrigerator. For an American, a refrigerator is public. For us Europeans, close to a rape. I mean, what the hell is he doing in my refrigerator? We didn't have a car. Typically Dutch, you borrow one. So in America, you need my car, take my car, no problem. Have you tried this in Germany? Take my Mercedes? No way. Here's my wife, but leave my Mercedes. And finally, furniture. In America, people move, they leave their furniture. Have you tried this in France? It's called antique. You can't get rid of it. It's very private. Now, according to Kurt Lewin, this, what we call peach, this U-type, interacting with another U-type leads to a specific relationship. Cut the crap. What is our relationship about? Fons, are you married? Yes, what for? Tax deduction. That's a specific relationship. A final example to make the transition to the coconut is when I got my PhD in a club called Wharton, they suddenly called me Dr. Trompenaars in the university, but the same people called me Fons outside of the university. In other words, even a title is specific. In Germany at least, you're a hair doctor in the university, your hair doctor is still at work, you come home, guten Abend, Frau Doctor. Where are the little doctors? And that's the coconut. And the coconut is tough on the outside, and that's why initially there is no relationship. But once you know each other, around October, you really go all the way. And the coconuts merge, and you are hair doctor while your Frau is Frau Doctor. The big problem is when the coconut meets the peach. You understand, the coconut is diffuse, tough on the outside, very inaccessible initially. The peach is very accessible, but with a very tough nut in the center. This creates all kinds of misunderstandings. And it's also a conceptual model that explains the specific peach, we want to reduce costs, versus the diffuse coconut, we want to develop our people. How did we measure this? We asked people, would you paint the house of your boss? Answer A, dear boss, go to hell. Answer B, yeah, it's my boss and therefore I need to help. Look at people who said, I will not help to paint the house of my boss if he or she asks for it. You see that 91% of the Dutch and the Swedes say no way. Well, obviously because 9% in both countries are immigrants. And you go down the line and you end up in China where only 32% will not follow up the request of the boss. A very surprising score here is Japan. 71% said we will not paint the house of the boss. That's interesting, isn't it? We interviewed the Japanese because we were surprised. You know what they said? In Japan, we will never wait till the boss asks. Now, what do we do with this? Have you heard of the balance scorecard? It was voted the most used tool in HR management of the last decade. The balance scorecard looks for balance, another bipolar concept. It's bankrupt. What we need to do in a diverse environment is to integrate the scorecard. And in other words, we need to make from this dilemma of, on the one hand, going for specific financial performance, and on the other hand, diffusely develop our people, we need to crack the line in a dual axis. And now what we see is a wonderful tension where if we exaggerate one, we get cost cutting yourself. If we exaggerate the other side, we get the subsidized seminar. What great companies do is they tie their training and development of their people with cost cutting. We were asked by companies to give cross-cultural training under one condition, that we could show how it would help them in either increasing their revenues or reducing their costs. Our training became better, a sign of reconciliation. So what we're seeing here is that the servant leader, the new paradigm of leadership, knows how to deal with competing demands. Another example. The balance scorecard also looks at, do we need to direct our improvements internally and make our business process better? Or do we need to look outside to the customer? It's a dilemma. Let's have a look at this dilemma where we take the dual axis. On the one hand, if we only go for the inner directed improvements, you will end up in lean but mean. If you go for the outer directed increase in customer satisfaction, you get the wonderful experience of to be the captive of the customer and you just rub his or her legs. What we need to do is to co-create, and that is the reconciliation of both inner and outer world. And this is very often not done. So the appraisal discussion should not be, what did you do with the SAP implementation? Oh, you focused on that, but you forgot the customer. Oh, I understand, next year the customer. Or you did everything for the customer, you didn't have time for the internal world. What a great servant leader does is to ask, hey Hank, what have you done with the customer lately that helped you to make a better implementation of SAP? Or vice versa. Let's go to the next tension. And the next tension is a tension, are we focused on people or rather on process? And let's not exaggerate, because if you exaggerate, on the one hand you get the sweatshop. Concern with people leads to the country club. What is very effective is concern for productive people. Again, a reconciliation. Let's go to the last two examples. And it's very important that we understand that these tensions, if we reconcile it, lead to a wonderful, sustainable type of organization, but it needs a new paradigm of leadership. One is very close to innovation. In innovation, we see we need all kinds of team roles. We need the plant, for example, in the beginning of the process, who creates ideas. And on the other hand, what we need is a wonderful critical analysis by the monetary evaluator. It's a dilemma. How do we reconcile it? The dilemma between the plant and the monetary evaluator is obvious if you exaggerate the extremes. If you only go for creative ideas, you end up in an inspirational world full of blue sky Amsterdam coffee shops. If you are only critical on ideas, you dedicate yourself and kill all ideas at birth. What we need to create is a reconciliation. And the reconciliation is, can we realize ideas through critical oxygen? And that is something done on the basis of synectics. When anybody comes up with a great idea, first give two positives about the idea, and then formulate your criticism. How can I help you to overcome the handicaps I see in this idea? That's a reconciliation. That's what a servant leader does. We come to a summary. What we have found in our research is that the leadership of the future, dealing with diversity, needs one meta competence, is recognition of dilemmas and the way to reconcile it. Great leaders say, not this is one or the other side. Great leaders say, we need to combine. And that is something that the servant leader shows best. The servant leader, you remember, those who enable their people to perform better, is a concept developed by Greenleaf. And Greenleaf was with AT&T for 30 years. And he said there are some leaders at the top that crush within a year, and those who stay there for 20 years. What's the difference? The difference is that those who crush, that are non-sustainable leaders, always were busy how other people could help him or her. Servant leaders, those who were sustainable, were always trying to help others to perform better. Let's show this in a dilemma shape. First of all, if we only go for what you do and you really focus on performance, like let's say in Holland, where you challenge leaders, you don't care where they're coming from, it's not a good idea, let's challenge the leader. It leads to lost democratic leadership. The opposite is no feedback to the leader. You give him or her status by just seniority, role, job title, and you see it ends up with follow the leader and we all drop down the cliff. The servant leader, finally, is the person who enables others to perform better. Look at holding the ladder where others can climb. And that is a paradigm that works best in a diverse environment. Perhaps the best picture to show is the servant leader at the top or at the bottom? It depends. Sometimes they're at the bottom as a pure servant. Sometimes they're at the top, but they combine the two. By giving help to others, you increase your authority. That's the servant leader. I come to a final statement, and that is, servant leaders use better rules by using exceptions. They discriminate positive by holding people accountable for their achievements. They reduce costs by developing people. They connect inner with outer worlds. They innovate through discipline. They have concern for productive people. They are back in control by letting go. They enhance reputation by serving customer wants. And finally, they lead by serving. And that leads to a wonderful statement combining perhaps issues of this time, that an organization's sustainability is created by the competence of its leaders to deal with dilemmas effectively, especially those dilemmas between stakeholders, and they create culture as a warm bath of making this happen. I would like to introduce you to our website, because our website gives you a tool where you can check how good a servant leader you are. And I think especially you here in Munich have gone through a presentation that will enable you to know more about yourself, but now also through the website. Good luck in applying this. Thank you very much.